What's something you can admit about a company you no longer work for? I used to work in the marketing team for a large recruitment company. About 99% of the jobs posted on their websites, the company owned about 35 web domains and shared on other websites are fake. The marketing and SEO department was tasked in creating super optimized job listings that outperformed real job listings. To apply to these job listings, you would have to register an account. This would inflate our candidate database and we would have loads of CVS. The sales team would then take this information and contact companies to get them to pay to put their open vacancies on our websites because we had one of the largest candidate databases. I remember getting so annoyed by this practice, I started reporting these vacancies as fake, even on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn rejected my report saying it was legitimate. It wasn't. And I know this because I created that fake vacancy. What makes this even more alarming is that so many recruitment companies do this. If you want to apply for a job, you're better off going to that company's website instead and not using a third party. I left that place and swore I would never work in recruitment again. Nursing homes are always understaffed and overworked. The worst one I ever saw was 3 caregivers to 72 residents. That's 3 people who are responsible for feeding, toileting, and showering 72 people every day. Mistakes and abuse are incredibly common due to the sheer burnout that is rampant. Imagine being told after a 16-hour shift that you aren't allowed to leave because of abandonment laws for another 16 hours because someone didn't show up for their shift and doing so while making barely above minimum wage. My first job out of high school was as a CNA at a nursing home, and it was awful. Not only being extremely overwhelmed by everyone hitting their call buttons, but literally not having the time to spend with the residents so they didn't feel so alone. Because of that experience, I had 0 issues driving 2 hours one way 3 to 4 times a week to help my mom shower and get ready for bed when she was in a rehab facility for a few months after being sick. Stanford University has a database full of everyone that's ever attended the school or ever been treated at their hospitals. With the right access, you can look up anyone in their system and see their employment history, every place they've lived since graduating, and their connections within the larger Stanford community. The best part. There's a section that gives all the tax income information, with an estimate based on equations that say how much the person could realistically donate to the school without negative effect. That way, when they call to fundraise, they know exactly how much to ask for. We supported 1,000 plus businesses' office phone systems, and they all use the same password for their admin access to their systems. I worked for a research company which had around 100 subscriptions. They used the same passwords for all the accounts. They also did not change the passwords when researchers would leave the company. When I mentioned that this was a massive security risk, they shrugged their shoulders and said they believed fired employees would know not to use the subscriptions. Lunacy. My family owned veterinary hospitals. Now, I know the price has gotten nuts, but that is not what this post is about. Most vets truly care, and I have seen some do anything, literally anything, to help your animal. I remember wanting to leave after closing, so tired, and my dad, the vet, telling me he wasn't leaving yet. He wanted to sit with this one dog all night. Long past NDA. I used to support restaurant POS systems. Every system managed and supported by us had the same admin username and password for the computers, the admin software back of house, and the credit card processing software. Also, their employee database file on the terminals was an Excel spreadsheet. It had their names, login hashtags, addresses, date of birth, phone numbers, social security numbers, etc. And you could mention aforementioned admin username, password to access them. They also outsource support to a country that hates the US. As I train them, they reminded me quite often how they don't like the US. As a former compliance director for telehealth mental health agencies, I would urge people to run from agencies like BetterHelp, Talkspace, Charlie Health, Guideline Healthcare, Ellie Health, etc. These are started by TechCore and other driven corporations and have little interest in protecting you, whether it's your mental health, confidentiality, or ethically driven care. These places are unacceptable and have low-quality treatment providers. You are best to find a local MH agency or individuals on Psychology Today. This was about 20 years ago, but when I worked in a call center at Sprint, our calls would get recorded and we would receive an email that included a link to where we could review a transcript of our call. This transcript included the 3 pieces of personally identifiable information needed to access someone's account. Well, the email they sent to us used a GetParameter ID that was simply a number to reference our transcript. Basically, it would be www.internalcompanywebsite.com/transcripts. ID equal to 123456778. If you change the number, you would get someone else's transcript and the 3 pieces of personally identifiable information. I figured that's a pretty big security hole, but I at least have to access it from my personal office computer, so they'd see who did it. Unless you went to the break room where you could access it there. Seeing how I was just out of college and I wanted to get a software engineering job, I brought this up to management, who proceeded to do nothing. I left a couple months later for a SW engineering job. It is very difficult for IHG to remove hotels from the portfolio if they are paying their dues and are mid-life cycle. They can be very bad hotels, and there is nothing that can be done except for some rare life-threatening situations. Some hotels have consistently failed every quality evaluation for years but will remain in the system because, at the end of the day, they make money for the company no matter how hard they harm the brand name. Marriott can do it a bit more easily for non-compliant hotels due to the structure of the quality department being through a third party. Dozens of things are stolen from every single Walmart every single day, and the fucks given by management about it are very few and far between. Edit, they like to pretend otherwise, but in reality, management actively joke about how much it was stolen day to day. What they say to everyone else and what they say behind the scenes doesn't remotely match up. Walmart, in particular, has no reason to care about inventory shrink due to theft. This is because a typical contract between Walmart and one of their merchandise suppliers states that Walmart does not need to pay the supplier for each unit until it is rung up on the POS and sold. Supposedly, this means that suppliers will only send high-performing items to Walmart that will make turns and sell quickly. In reality, this means that the supplier covers all of the damage and inventory shrink 100%, without Walmart having to so much as write a report. Walmart corporate does not care if you steal an item they are buying from someone else, because if it never gets rung up, they don't have to pay for it. This wouldn't apply to their private label stuff, though. At the company I worked for, everyone was assigned a Microsoft account. This was used for Outlook emailing and Teams for instant messaging and video calls. Naturally, plenty of privileged and sensitive information was exchanged in these ways. Everyone had the same password. It was first name, last name. Every employee and manager. I didn't have the guts to test the theory on an executive's account. And this was a company that, among other droll and boring trainings, made sure we had our requisite cybersecurity anti-phishing training. There was lots more silliness at that company, but that right there tells you all you need to know. I worked for a bunny farm. We're raising bunnies for laboratories. They investigated my identity for weeks to see if I was some sort of Greenpeace agent. I found it weird at first, but then I understood why. They kept 7 to 8 bunnies in a skew-meter cage and didn't give AF about them. They were using metal scrubs to scrub the cages and break baby bunnies' legs while doing it. Some smaller bunnies were falling out of the cage in a section that all their poop trash was crushed by a machine and would make a little squeak before getting crushed. I quit after 4 days. Worst experience in my life. They stole $5 $10 million in PPP loans and laid off 230 SRDs of their staff in the same breath, one of the largest PPP loan recipients in my state. Please report them. There are active investigations happening for the rampant fraud that happened. People like me, who had a small business and needed it, were denied because the funds had run out by the time we jumped through all the hoops we needed to as small businesses. Please report these a-holes. They stole from every American to line their own pockets. I don't know the specifics, the laws and such, but the manager of the Amazon warehouse I was at wasn't allowed to tell workers they couldn't use the fans or AC in these 100-degree environments. But somehow, he was allowed to shut off the fans and AC whenever he wanted. So this guy would spend the entire day most days following around anyone who would turn them on and personally turn them back off immediately. He was later fired on paper for telling people they couldn't use the fans and AC, but really it was because the new district head just didn't like him. Amazon had absolutely no problems with the guy shutting fans off. People had been sending in complaints about it for years, but never had a word back about it. I worked for a candy company that makes chocolate-coated pretzels and turtles for over 5 years. By the time I left, I wouldn't eat the candy even when they were giving it away. I saw them let tainted product leave the factory and covering it up, because reworking it would be too expensive to faking food safety compliance and safety checks. Years after I left, the entire team running operations got replaced at once, so maybe it's better now, but holy shit. It made me paranoid about packaged food in general and a little horrified at how much blind faith we put in the people that make our food. Edit. Don't want them to sue me, so I won't say the name, but it's basically the top result when you Google chocolate turtles. For years, we manufactured processes thousands of components incorrectly that substantially increase the probability of sudden and catastrophic failure. The component. Well, it's the main attachment points for various missiles, bombs for the U.S. military. Discovered this shortly after working there, notified the operations manager, who ignored it, notified the president, who kind of acknowledged it but refused to address it or notify the customer. Finally notified the ownership, who promptly had me replaced. LOL. Your child's daycare worker is extremely overworked and underpaid. Parents would complain all the time about how much daycare cost, but it's less expensive than a babysitter. I always wanted to ask the complaining parent how much they would charge to watch 13 children they were not related to. I worked in the U.S. We literally had to have a plan on what we would do if an armed gunman broke in. I've worked for Bank of America and Wells Fargo, and both banks screw over customers constantly, but there is a difference in how and why they do it. Bank of America will screw you over because they are huge and disorganized, and no one has a clue what's going on, so customers get screwed over when people don't know how to do their job, and no one knows how to fix it when things go wrong. Wells Fargo will screw you over, and they know exactly what they are doing and how they are going to do it. They will intentionally design a process to take too long, forcing the customer to pay additional fees. A long time ago, I caught WF in an error. I don't remember exactly what happened. Maybe it was leaving multiple charges in limbo. But my balance was low because I was a broke kid, and I had multiple debit card charges that got staggered in such a way that the big ones hit first, and then all the tiny charges hit later, which resulted in things that cost a few dollars, racking up overdraft fees of $30 each. I noticed that there was some deliberate fuckery going on because had the processing been done correctly, I would have had a single overdraft fee instead of like 10. It was so blatant that when I called and explained, the rep was like, WTF, and reversed all the fees. Bed Bath and Beyond. Utter abuse of employees and sexual harassment from the top down. Always got swept under the rug. If the girl guy got an attorney, they'd move the manager supervisor to a different location temporarily. I say temporarily because they eventually fire or get the employee to quit soon after. They cut hours and say there was no budget for it, even though that was the only employee affected. I'm happy they're out of business. Edit. I remember there was a time when only managers, not supervisors, were allowed to open the door after hours to let us out. We were forced to stay on the clock and clean up and whatnot. That all changed when a girl had a severe panic attack, apparently, which induced a cardiac episode. We kept screaming for the manager to no avail, was called and were told we were locked in with a medical emergency. They showed up before the door was open, and you could clearly see the employee in distress. They finally opened the door when the police were after the paramedics. The manager got read the riot act by the cops, and a detailed report was made. Paramedics said they believed she was having a heart attack and was taken away with lights and sirens. Triple B got in so much trouble. I am happy to say the employee was fine after being treated. She sued the dog piss and won her case, so I heard. Also, the other employees who had suits for false imprisonment won their cases too. Absolutely horrible company to work for. Almost every president, CEO, CFO I worked for was an egomaniac who was cheating on his wife, usually with an employee that works for them, and were compulsive liars. In one specific company, the CEO was sued several times by former employees for sexual harassment, but kept doing it anyways, and the CFO lied about the company financial status to lay off about 70 employees, when in actuality all they wanted to do was more than double his and the CEO's salaries. Back about 30 years ago, I worked in the IT department for a famous brand name aerospace firm. Name withheld to protect the innocent engineers specializing in the construction and testing of satellites. My main responsibilities were maintaining some very old computer systems, a lot of stories about that, and some ground equipment, but sometime I would have to put on a bunny suit and fix something at engineering workstations in the high bays. One day, a strange wooden box about size of a large shoebox was shipped to my desk by the internal mail people. I sometimes got shipments of things like memory modules or hard disks. But this box has paper stickers on it clearly labeled flight hardware, something that should never have been shipped to me. Out of curiosity, I opened it and found in the box a device called a flight sequencer, basically one of the key devices that controls a spacecraft in flight. What was stranger, the spacecraft that this sequencer belonged to was a high-profile deep space probe for a Mars mission. One of the first missions to Mars in a long time. More confusing was that Mars craft has been launched about 3 months earlier. So I found myself holding the flight hardware sequencer for a space probe that was already several million miles away, and there would be no chance to install it now. Of course, there is a nearly 100% chance a spare had been used for the launch, but there was a certain "oh-sht" moment when I realized what it was. Of course, a few months later, that space probe was lost when it tried to enter Mars' orbit. I'm sure that is completely unrelated chance. Right. A lot of the stuff you donate to Goodwill goes straight into the garbage. No, the clothes aren't washed before going to the sales floor, and most of the items are not cleaned. Please be careful and clean disinfect if you decide to purchase it. Yes, they are raising prices to give more to the higher-ups while not giving anything to the people actually doing all of the work. Goodwill pays disabled employees significantly less than minimum wage. Most of the nice stuff that you donate is going to e-commerce to be sold at an inflated auction price and not to a local person who might want it. No, the sales donation associate can't give you a receipt with a cash value for all of the junk that you just threw in the bin. Stop asking. The receipt just shows a rough estimate of what you donated. It's up to you to determine the value of your donation if you're that much of a tax rat. No, you can't sell anything to Goodwill. That's not what the word donation means. Yes, this is all somehow legal. College bookstores are a king racket. The used books that are sold for a high cost were likely bought back for a fraction. The only people that got the good price for book buyback were the first 5 to 10 people selling that book back. I saw a book be bought back for $200, and the next person through with that exact same book got offered $50. The add-ins for things like clickers were obscene. Books that were okayed for the school year would regularly get new versions that could just have 2 chapters flipped, but the new version meant that nobody could buy used. And the prof that wrote it gets a huge payout. The few good profs that gave away their materials were few and far between. The notion that digital books would be cheaper is laughable. Sure, they're charging $100 versus $200, but that's a $100 PDF. It's a racket, and I'm glad I don't need to mess with it anymore. I worked for a very expensive hotel in an even more expensive area. I watched many people cheat on their spouses and spend copious amounts of money on stupid things. Yes, I saw you vomit on the steps and walk away. Yes, I know you just effed in our public restroom. Staff 100% do steal lost items, and others are counting down the 60 days so they can take your forgotten items home legally. No, I can't watch your kids while you go out wine tasting. I'm well aware of the prostitute you snuck out. She's a regular in the area, and we're on a first-name basis. And yes, I do know where you can buy illegal drugs, but I'm not telling. You are being overcharged and upsold on everything. We were trained to do it while lying to your face about discounts and deals. Also, all hotels hate third parties. Most of your upcharges are actually from them. We could have given you a better discount if you asked. They make us hide the real price you pay when you check in. Lots of restrictions. We do match prices, but not in the busy season. The third party we hate the most is Groupon because they genuinely slashed our prices at 75% or more, and the people that tended to use them always trashed our rooms and stole. Things like lamps and TVs. Not that our owners or managers care, and yes, the staff is extremely underpaid for the jobs they do when the company is more than capable of paying them more. I work for a very large healthcare company. Tomorrow is my last day. Think the number one in the US. Few things about them. Was an adept. That did lots of IVs and gave coffee to the patients after their testing. The company refuses to buy Coban elastic tape. We have PTs who are on blood thinners or have sweaty skin, in which case regular paper or plastic tape is not going to work. We've had several incidents where people on blood thinners bleed through the dressing we put on the site and drip onto the floor or their clothes. Yes, we can apply pressure to help, but 1, I have a super tight schedule and don't have time to do that, and 2, the PTs are radioactive. I don't want to spend any more time next to them than I absolutely have to. This was brought up to a manager around the time they were doing bonuses. The manager told us we could have Coban, or we could have bonuses, raises. We don't use it often, definitely not for every PT. You can buy 120 rolls of the stuff for about $25. Regarding the coffee, it was made by a big coffee maker and put into a carafe. That carafe never got washed with soap or a sponge the entire 2 years I was there. Just a quick rinse with water. They also let their service agreements expire for the very expensive camera when it was near the end of its life, but also refused to replace the camera, so lots of very expensive service calls were placed. They also allowed bullying by coworkers, and even after speaking with the manager, the offending parties were allowed to continue being abusive. Nothing done about it at all. For-profit healthcare is not only bad for the patients, but bad for the employees too. I work for a large health insurance company. They already have a plan in place that will drop millions of people with pre-existing conditions if the ACA is repealed. And I'm talking about small pre-existing conditions, allergies, asthma, etc. They'll then offer insurance for well over $2,000 per month. I want to edit this just for clarification, my own peace of mind. I do currently work there. I used to be high up in the ranks. But my mom became disabled, and I took a demotion and pay cut to take care of her full time. But they had this plan way back when I was still in my previous job. They were waiting for it to be repealed any day to execute. One thing they want to make sure is never covered unless you pay the premium price is insulin, EpiPens, AMD chemotherapy. An intelligence agency within a powerful government asked me to steal a report for them that was going to accuse them of assassinating Patrice Lumumba. Said no. At the same job, I also caught a high-ranking diplomat from a different powerful government steal papers from our printer. Reported him. Lastly, a minister from a Gulf state tried to give me a Cartier watch and my boss a Rolex. We gave them back. I worked at the UN. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to see more.